I want to tell you exactly how my night went, because it explains why I'm sitting here talking to you about this instead of doing literally anything else I had planned. I had shut the laptop, done for the day, mentally checked out, and then my phone would not stop buzzing on the nightstand, that relentless kind of buzzing that tells you something's actually happening out there. I almost let it ride until morning. I didn't. I opened it up, and what I found on the other side of that screen is exactly the kind of story that would have kept me up anyway. So, let's just get into it now instead. Here's the setup, and I need you to really sit with the timeline on this one. Just days after grinding through a full squad workout with basically every skill player on Cleveland's offense, Shedeur Sanders had every excuse in the world to take it easy. Nobody would have blinked if he'd taken that downtime and disappeared for a few days. Instead, he went straight from that grind into hosting another youth football camp. No breather, no recovery trip, straight from one form of work into another. And I think that detail alone tells you something, because we spend so much time in this industry talking about what a guy does when nobody's forcing him to be anywhere. And here's a player who keeps choosing visibility, keeps choosing to show up for kids, camp after camp, city after city, without a single sign of slowing that pace down. And the footage from this thing, I'm telling you, it's beautiful chaos. Kids sprinting in every direction, tripping over their own cleats just trying to get within 10 feet of him. That raw, unfiltered joy you only see in children who haven't figured out yet how complicated the adult version of this world actually is. On the surface, this should be the single easiest, most uncontroversial feel-good story of the entire offseason. It should be. We're going to get into exactly why it wasn't, because with this guy, somehow, it never quite stays that simple. But before we get into the noise, and there's plenty of it coming, I actually want you to hear what he said, because his answer after the event wrapped hit differently than the usual recycled post-game filler we all sit through. A reporter asked him point blank about the quarterback room, about whether there's actual tension simmering under the surface, the way certain corners of the internet love to insist there is. And his answer was calm, level, almost matter-of-fact in a way that told you it wasn't some rehearsed talking point handed to him by a media coach. He explained that nothing about the approach in that room has changed since day one. Every guy in there is simply trying to sharpen himself, and nobody's letting outside noise wedge itself between that and the respect they've built for each other. He described it as less about ego, more about conversation. If he sees something in a teammate's game worth asking about, he asks. If a teammate sees something in his, they ask him right back. No politics buried underneath any of it. No manufactured drama. Just a group of guys pulling in the same direction. And then he said something that I genuinely think got completely buried under everything that happened afterward. He said every single part of his life has improved. Not just his footwork. Not just how quickly he's processing coverage at the line. His sleep. His breathing, how much water he's drinking, the rhythm of his mornings, his meetings, his recovery, everything. You can write that off as generic athlete speak if you want to. I don't buy that read at all. What I hear is a young quarterback telling you, in real time, that he's rebuilding himself from the ground up in front of a locker room that sounds like it's genuinely buying in right alongside him. Because here's the part people conveniently skip past. He wasn't only talking about the practice field. He brought up a trip to Miami, where a chunk of the roster, whoever's schedule allowed it, flew out together completely off the clock, away from the building, away from every camera that usually trails this team, just to exist as people instead of coworkers for a few days. Sanders was upfront about it too. Not everybody made it. Some schedules just didn't line up, and that's fine. That's life. But for the guys who did go, he described something close to a real bond forming. Not some scripted, front office mandated team building retreat. An actual bond. And he made a point of saying the group already committed to keeping that momentum alive now that everyone's back in the building. Let's actually sit inside the camp itself for a second, because I think this is where you see exactly who this guy is when nobody's asking him about completion percentages or draft evaluations. Somebody asked him what his favorite part of the day was, and it wasn't the drills. It wasn't a highlight-worthy throw or some kid pulling off an insane grab. It was the people working quietly in the background the whole time. He specifically called out the Browns community outreach staff, the local foundation partners who helped pull the entire thing together, the volunteer coaches who gave up their day for free, the parents who drove their kids out there. The small touches that made the whole event feel special instead of routine. That's what actually lit him up. Not the spotlight landing on him. The machine of people working behind the scenes to make sure 500+ kids walked away with a day they're going to remember for years. And I have to talk about one specific moment because it's already turning into one of those clips that's going to circulate on football social media forever. There's a young girl at this camp, and I mean genuinely young, who pulls off an absolutely ridiculous move. Jukes a defender clean, sticks a no-hands backflip like it's nothing at all, and Sanders' reaction is priceless, half joking that he can't even land backflips like that anymore, that he needed a hand down just to survive one back in his day, and here's this kid casually sticking it without a second thought. That's the kind of organic, completely unscripted moment no PR team on earth can fabricate, and it's exactly why these camps hit different than a stiff, staged charity photo op. Alright, now here's where I have to pump the brakes because you already saw this coming. Somebody somewhere was always going to find a way to twist this into a controversy because that's just the atmosphere Shedeur Sanders exists inside of right now. It genuinely does not matter what the man does. It does not matter how overwhelmingly positive the actual story is. There's a whole segment of football media that has built its identity around manufacturing a problem with this guy, even when the story sitting right in front of them is 500 kids sprinting across a field with the biggest smiles you've ever seen on camera. And this time, the man stepping up to fill that role is Rex Ryan. Within hours, I mean hours, of this camp footage going viral for every right reason imaginable, Rex Ryan is out there on social media, somehow twisting the whole thing into a shot at Sanders' character. The gist of it landed somewhere around this. Sure, plenty of talent, but as a franchise quarterback, he needs to understand there's more we than me in this. That was the tone. A backhanded compliment wrapped tightly around a quiet little jab, fired off right after watching a guy spend his supposed downtime pouring himself into kids who never asked him for anything beyond a football and a memory worth holding on to. And I'll be straight with you, that take made me physically sit up. Because walk through the actual timeline here with me. This isn't a guy who wrapped a camp and then went and did something reckless or self-serving with the rest of his week. This is a player who, days earlier, was out there sweating through a full team workout alongside his receivers, his running backs, his teammates, voluntarily. Nobody made him show up. And then he turned right back around and gave even more of himself to a community full of strangers. So when I hear, there needs to be more we than me, my honest reaction is, which me moment are you even talking about, Rex? Because everything I just watched play out was the textbook definition of we, grinding alongside the team, flying teammates out to build something real in Miami, crediting the people working behind the scenes before he ever credited himself. That's not a me story by any fair measure. That's about as we as it gets in this league. And look, I want to be fair here, because I always try to be fair, even when it would be easier not to. My problem was never that people get to criticize Shedeur Sanders. That's simply part of what comes with being a public figure at this level. You accept the scrutiny. You accept the hot takes. You accept people picking apart your accuracy, your pocket presence, your decision-making. Football is football. I respect the game far too much to treat criticism like it's some kind of enemy. That part's completely normal. What actually bothers me is when the criticism stops being about the game entirely and starts targeting character, especially when the character in question is, by nearly every visible measure available to us, solid, community-driven, free of off-field drama. A guy whose single worst publicly documented offense, as far as I've ever seen, is a speeding ticket. That's the entire scandal. A speeding ticket. Now hold that up against some of the actual noise swirling around other names across this league right now. Real personal conduct allegations, genuine off-field controversies that put a player's reputation on the line in ways that actually matter. Sanders isn't anywhere near that conversation. He's never been anywhere near it. And yet the sheer volume of criticism aimed specifically at his character, not his game, has been wildly disproportionate almost from the second he walked into this league. And honestly, I think I understand why. I think it's because he's become the story. He's currently one of the most talked about figures in this entire sport, whether you're rooting for him or you genuinely can't stand the guy. And once you turn into that kind of lightning rod, there's a very real, very cynical financial incentive baked into modern media for certain personalities to lean straight into criticizing you. Because outrage generates infinitely more engagement than praise ever does. It's simply easier to build a following by hating on a guy hosting a free youth camp than it is to just say, plainly, hey, that's a genuinely good thing he's doing. That's the uncomfortable truth sitting underneath a lot of sports commentary right now. And since we're already talking about Rex Ryan, let's rewind for a second, because context matters here. This isn't some spotless commentator lobbing stones from behind unbreakable glass. Rex Ryan carries his own well-documented, very public history of controversy, situations that made national headlines for reasons that had absolutely nothing to do with football strategy and everything to do with personal conduct. I'm not going to walk through the details, it's been covered plenty elsewhere. But there's something almost darkly funny about a guy carrying that kind of history, lecturing a 20-something quarterback about needing to think more about the team and less about himself, directly after that quarterback spent his entire week proving he was doing exactly that. I'm not saying Rex Ryan doesn't get to have opinions on football. He earned his seat in this industry, coached at the highest level for years. But the second the criticism shifts away from his reads are coming late, or he needs a quicker release, and into implying a guy is somehow selfish for running a free camp for hundreds of kids, that's not analysis anymore. That's just noise, manufactured for the sake of making noise. And here's the part that gets me the most about this whole thing. I don't think Sanders is out here looking for anybody to praise him. Nothing about how he spoke after the camp sounded like a man fishing for compliments or padding some highlight reel of his own generosity. If anything, he sounded genuinely caught off guard by how much love he was getting back from the kids and the surrounding community, visibly moved by the whole response. He talked about how, at this level, there's a real pull toward isolation, locked into facilities, hotel rooms, film sessions, cut off from the actual world you're supposedly representing every single Sunday. And he framed this camp as his way of breaking out of that bubble, of stepping back into the community and watching, in real time, exactly what showing up consistently can create. He called it a simple task. Just showing up. And he said plainly that he's grateful for the chance to do it. There's earlier footage worth mentioning too, a clip of him and his crew landing and heading straight for the event, still buzzing off the flight, hyping each other up, saying they'd heard the turnout for this thing was going to be massive before they'd even walked through the door. It was. Kids losing their minds the instant he stepped inside. That kind of raw, completely unscripted energy, caught on camera. You cannot manufacture that no matter how much planning or money goes into producing it. Either the connection is real, or the whole thing falls apart the second a camera's pointed at it, and from everything I watched, this one was real. So when I see that kind of energy on one side of my screen, and then scroll down and find a tweet trying to spin that exact same day into some kind of me-first narrative, it genuinely frustrates me. Think about how many young athletes carrying that level of scrutiny, that much money, that much pressure to protect their own personal brand, would just skip the camp circuit entirely. Would say, I'll handle the bare minimum required appearances and call it a season. Sanders keeps choosing to do more, publicly, consistently, camp after camp, city after city, without anybody forcing his hand. And instead of that becoming the actual headline, the headline turns into one tweet questioning his priorities. I also want to circle back to something he said that got completely buried underneath all the Rex Ryan discourse. He talked about earning respect in this league, about understanding you can't walk into a locker room as a young player and start dictating terms to veterans who've been grinding in this business for a decade or more. He said it takes time, real relationships, bringing guys onto the same page organically instead of forcing anything. That's a remarkably mature read on locker room dynamics for a quarterback carrying this much national attention. Plenty of players with double his experience never fully grasp that lesson. He seems to already understand it instinctively, that real leadership in this league doesn't get handed to you because of a last name or a draft slot. It gets built slowly through consistency and humility. And that Miami trip keeps sitting with me too, honestly. Think about the optics of it. A young quarterback central to organizing a trip specifically built around team bonding, away from the pressure of the building, right in the middle of an off-season full of speculation about locker room chemistry. That's not something a selfish player thinks to arrange. If anything, that trip should be the actual story dominating today's conversation, not one tweet questioning his priorities. Before I let you go, I do want to touch on one more thing floating around out there, only because it's been making people laugh all week. Cam Scatabo has been running his usual chaotic, borderline unhinged brand of content, genuinely eating crayons on camera at this point, if you can believe that's a sentence I just said out loud with a straight face. That has nothing to do with Shedeur Sanders or this camp story whatsoever, completely unrelated. But it's out there, it's funny, and at this point it's just part of the background static of this league's off-season news cycle. But let's pull the focus back to what actually matters here, because I don't want that little tangent stealing attention from the real story. What we watched unfold was a young quarterback, fresh off a genuinely exhausting team workout, immediately turning around and pouring his time into hundreds of kids who are going to remember this day for the rest of their lives. We watched him credit everyone around him before he ever credited himself. We watched him talk about growth touching every corner of his life, not just the parts that show up neatly on a stat sheet. And we watched, right on schedule, certain corners of the media scramble to dig up a negative angle buried somewhere inside all of it anyway. I'll say this plainly, because I actually believe it. I don't think the criticism aimed at Shedeur Sanders' character has ever really been about his character at all. I think it's about attention. I think it's about an algorithm that rewards manufactured controversy over honest compliments every single time without fail. And I think the more this kid keeps showing up, keeps putting in the work, keeps giving back without asking for a single thing in return, the harder it's going to get for that tired narrative to hold its own weight much longer. So that's where I'm leaving things tonight. A camp full of 500 kids who got to meet one of the most talked about players in football. A quarterback who says he's improved every single part of his life, on the field and off it. A locker room that sounds, by his own account, more genuinely connected than it's ever been. And on the other side of the screen, one tweet trying to twist all of that into some kind of knock on his character. And honestly, I already know exactly which side of that story I'm choosing to believe.